Hey YouTube, Dosm here with my latest top 5 video, this time on top 5 worst Super Sentai series. Now, I just want to make it clear at the beginning of the video, I try to make it clear at the beginning of every one of these videos, but specifically on the worst ones, that this is my personal list. This isn't me like trying to use some sort of algorithm to quantify what is actually the top 5 worst Sentais, that you should think that, and it's the actual like on record worst. I just want to make that clear in this because like in the PR one, I'm not like mad or anything, but I felt like there was people that were thinking like, well, how could this make the list? As if like I was saying, this is definitively the worst for everyone that was ever born and will be born. This is just my list. So, yeah, I just want to make that clear at the beginning. Just so we're all on the same page. But anyway, it's especially with these because my worst especially lists tend to be more controversial because apparently I'm a controversial figure. That sounds really overblown, but I get quite a lot of heat for my opinions in the fandom. But anyway, so let's start this off. Usually, if I remember right, because I have a terrible memory, I start with like honorable mentions, which is sort of weird to do for worst. And for worst ones, it will typically be something either that I hate so much that I want to make sure you guys know how much I hate it, even though it didn't make the top 5, or it's something that I feel like you're expecting to make the worst list, which there's a couple for PR, which I wish I would have done honorable mentions of like, this is why this didn't make the list even though you probably thought it would be. So for honorable mentions, I have one which I feel like people would be expecting to make the list just based on a somewhat generalish consensus in the fandom and also some of my early personal opinions on it, which is Resha Sentai Tokyuger. Very early on, well not very early because not the beginning of the show, but for the earliest part of its run, I'd say the first half, I was pretty vocal on Twitter and on the podcast about how little I was enjoying Tokyuger. And that kind of changed, which is why it didn't make the list. And it's not even on the level of I'm mentioning it because I think that it deserves to be mentioned in a hated category, because it was one of the only 2 Sentai series that I ever stopped watching live, and then I went back and caught up on because of, you know, the podcast and whatnot, and just completionist in general, which is kind of answers anybody's question of why I still watch certain shows I don't like. But anyway, it was roughly about halfway through that I stopped watching, maybe a little bit past. And so I caught up on it, and it did come off as better binged. It got good a lot earlier, roughly, I don't know, almost a little bit more than the fourth of the end of the series, or the last fourth of the series. Almost the last half I basically enjoyed. There was a few dumb episodes here and there to be sure, but my point is it got good earlier, I was more invested, and even from the get-go when I wasn't enjoying it, I liked a lot of the ideas Tokyuger had. I thought it had some of the coolest and most innovative ideas, and I was more fond of the characters than some of the other series. And so by the time it ended, I was actually quite pleased, and not to mention it also had a pretty damn good Returns movie, which I enjoyed a lot. I was excited to see them again, and the movie in general, with the exception of a few little hiccups. So that's why it didn't make the list, is that I'm actually quite fond of it now in many respects. It wasn't perfect, there's still things I didn't like, but yeah. Anyway, that's quite a long ways to go, about almost 4 minutes about something that isn't even on the worst list. But so now, for the actual worst list, prepare yourselves, get your pitchforks ready. So number 5 is Tenso Sentai Go-Onger. Now this one is actually almost in that same category as Tokyuger was. It was the first Sentai, like I just said, there was 2 Sentais that I stopped watching, and this was the first of the 2 that I ever stopped watching in the run. If you follow the podcast, or you know, us, myself, Shugun Shinobi, and Jetman, somewhere around there you might have heard of the famous Go-Onger prank where myself and Shuki stopped watching it without telling Jetman, which was pretty funny, classic. But again, I went back and caught up on it because we had to do our wrap-up. And Go-Onger also had that thing where the last arc, I would say around somewhere in the Mantarintis area, where it did start to get better. And the last fourth was actually pretty enjoyable. And I also did like a lot of its ideas. I really liked a lot of the designs. But honestly, I still disliked enough of it that it made this list. It's probably, of the 5 on this list, the one that I have the least animosity towards, but it definitely still had a lot of problems. Apparently there was a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff, a lot of cool ideas that couldn't get done. I don't know all the details, because there's very sparing details about behind-the-scenes Sentai knowledge, but I just remember there was some behind-the-scenes stuff. But it was just, it really dragged with a lot of nothing happening for the majority of the first half plus of the season, with the exception of stuff like Gosei Knight's debut. I didn't like the majority of the characters. It had enough that I still think it's one of the worst Sentai series I've seen in a lot of ways, but it did have some cool ideas I liked, and its in-game was solid. I just wish it would have gotten good sooner. But yeah, like I said, it's the one I have the least hatred for. After this point, I have quite a bit of animosity on certain levels for the rest on this list, so be prepared. But anyway, so number 4. This is probably gonna be the one that I get the most heat for being on a worst list based on the general fandom consensus, which is Shojin Sentai Jetman. Jetman is probably, at least from what I've seen, one of the most talked about, hyped up Sentai series of, oh man, Sentai's so dark and mature and so good, you gotta see it, Jetman, man, it's like Game of Thrones, but it's Toku. No. The overhype probably didn't help it. There's that classic overselling, and sometimes it can just be like, oh, that was good, but not as good as people were saying, but Jetman was just kind of dull for me. It had some cool stuff. I didn't hate the characters entirely, and there was parts of the characters I liked, but it was just so dull. The villains didn't have as much depth as I thought they were going to. Same goes for the characters, and you know, with I think Rio is Red's name? Oh, with his storyline about his fiance, the thing that bugged me about it is they only mentioned it when they needed to. It was an interesting storyline, but like it would be like one episode about the drama of, oh man, she's been turned evil or she's dead, and then the next episode suddenly canoeing. And that pet peeve about that series was driven home further when I watched Zyuranger, which had a similar-ish storyline about Aubrey Black's fiance or wife, I don't remember if they were married or not, but being thought dead and then being a villain, and it was always in the forefront. I mean, not like the main storyline, but I mean, it was always in the back of your mind. They always made sure that it was informing his character, and that was done so much better, and that just felt so flat. It was more relationshipy, which I don't necessarily mind because I liked some of that stuff in Kiva, but it just, there were so many elements that people hyped up that just came off as so dull to me. The character stuff never quite delivered that impact I thought it would. Same thing with the villain stuff. I feel like a lot of it comes down to it had blood and some quote-unquote more mature content, which I'm not saying this is everyone's opinion, but on some of the older series I see these general opinions, which I even saw in some of the comments when I was watching it online, of people that are like, oh man, blood dribbled down here, it's just so good and mature. And like, there was literally a comment on one of the episodes I watched where they're like, oh my god, they showed beer on camera, that's how hardcore Sentai is, not even kidding. So, it's just, I didn't like it. It was very dull to me. And I feel like another reason it is so hyped up is because of, spoiler alert from the 80s, of Guy's death, and everyone's like, he's a true hero. Guy is a true idiot who basically committed suicide from my point of view because he got stabbed. I thought he was going to die in some Zord battle or something, but no, he was stabbed, and then what probably could have been an easily treated wound, and he sat on a bench and let himself bleed out. And I've talked to multiple people about it, and they'll be like, oh, he just didn't want to ruin his friend's day, man. Like, that was such a heroic move. To not ruin their day for 15 minutes before they found his corpse in a pile of blood on the bench, I just didn't like Jetman. It was dull, it was way overblown, people thought like the mature aspects were way cooler than they were, and I just didn't care for it. I probably liked a few more things on it than the series that are coming up that I didn't like, but still, it's just... So anyway, I'll probably get comments about how crazy I am for not liking Jetman. So, I feel like that was the most disorganized I've gotten so far, so I'll probably get more disorganized from here. Number 3, Denji Sentai Megaranger. Megaranger was just plain forgettable, to be honest. It's kind of a funny story with Megaranger. Back when I first really got into Sentai, I did sort of a sampling where I watched a handful of episodes from multiple seasons just to get a feel for things. And at that time, I think it was only about 5 or 6 of Megaranger that actually was available. And I watched them, and I was like, oh, I actually kind of like that. I look forward to that being fully subbed someday. And when I got to it, it was just so forgettable. The plot, I barely remember any details. The characters all meshed together in one giant blob where I couldn't even tell them apart. Character-wise, they were just... I don't remember their names. I don't remember what their character traits were. I just remember Red being that classic, insane Toku Red. The only interesting parts were, I guess, the beginning, because that's what I kind of liked, and Mega Silver, I liked Mega Silver as a character, I liked his debut, I liked the concept of the prototype, but I honestly don't have as much to say about how much I disliked Megaranger compared to Jetman, because it was just so forgettable. It was just like par for the course dull Sentai for me, and it wasn't even so much a hatred of like, man, this is so stupid, why do people like this, or I hate this character, I hate this element. It was just like, it was boring. It was like reading a boring book or a boring lesson in school that you just can't retain, and I didn't like it. Like I said, I wish I had more to say because I felt like I went so long about Jetman, but it was just forgettable. Okay, number 2, Shuriken Sentai Ninninger, the most recent one on this list. It was a toss-up between this one and the number 1. They could swap places easily, but there's reasons number 1 made the spot over this. Mainly the reason Ninninger's not number 1 is because at least things were more visually pleasing, and there was probably more episodes that I enjoyed overall than the number 1, but that's not saying much, to be honest. The thing about Ninninger was, I absolutely loved the suits. I like the idea that a lot of the other designs for like the weapons and the mecha and all that are all over the place, because sometimes you can get the toy scans and see, man, this is weird, and then it ends up being amazing, like Gaim. Like, who would have known what they would have made out of a fruit show? So when the scans came out and we had like a frog gun and a dump truck and all these crazy elements, I wasn't too worried because we were coming off Gaim. And also, this was our 3rd ninja-based series, which I also wasn't worried about because we had just recently come off of our 3rd dinosaur-based series, which managed to be really good from my perspective, and also managed to make things different from Zyuranger and Zyuranger. So I just wasn't worried, and now I've learned to be more cautious. And honestly, you probably know this if you follow me, whether it's on Twitter or these videos or my Ninja videos, I just hated Ninja. I didn't like the characters. I think the only one I kind of liked was Kasumi. They were just so annoying, especially Takaharu was like the shining example of the obnoxious Toku honking your horn character, where he's just, his entire character is shouting and facial expressions, and humor is very subjective, but most Toku humor doesn't land with me when it's over the top, because it's just so much like, facial expression, stupid slapstick joke, this is supposed to be funny, laugh, it's funny. That's what it's like to me, and that was like the whole show. And some Tokus can have that humor and still have parts I like, and this one I really struggled with that because I felt like it was on all the time in terms of the humor. So it was trying to be so wacky so much of the time that it didn't ground itself, if that made any sense. So when it tried to be more serious or have you take a moment more seriously, I just couldn't, because they were on so much with the humor that I never found a touchstone to the characters where they felt like real people and not just walking clowns that are honking your horn in your face. So that really killed it for me. And even just stripping away all of the obnoxious humor, the storyline was very basic. The setup, everything about it, nothing really original, and even the coolest stuff they had about it was underused, and at the end of the day, it just wasn't good. And what I didn't like also is that with the storyline, it was mentioned very sparingly, and when it wasn't a focus, it felt like it didn't exist. Like you would have a plot episode and then like 7 fillers, and very rarely amongst those fillers would they even mention what was going on in the main plot, and that made it awkward. So not only did you have a bare bones paint by the numbers ninja plot, but it felt like it was only brought up every now and then, honking your horns in your face. I didn't like it at all. It was probably the worst experience I've had with a current running series, and I'm surprised I didn't stop watching it. I did stop watching it for a few weeks. I think it was like 3 weeks, and it wasn't even necessarily a full-on like, I'm gonna stop watching this. It was just kind of, I couldn't keep up with it, and I marathoned like 4 episodes, and I'm like, I can't stop watching this like I did with Go-Onger and Go-Onger, because a marathon of 20 plus episodes of this, not in a row, but like binging this later will be painful. Because with Go-Onger and Go-Onger, I binged it in multiple sittings later, and I was like, okay, there's some stuff here to be interesting, but I did like a mini binge, and I'm like, I can't do this. I can only tolerate the 20 minutes a week. There's no way I'll be able to binge this later. I have to watch it week to week. So I didn't like it. Okay, so number 1, which a lot of you probably already guessed, is Kyoryu Sentai Zyuranger. I hate Zyuranger. It is one of the worst shows I've ever seen from me. Like I said, Ninninger and it are pretty close, but this was just a mix of just obnoxious filler and dullness that I just hated. It's probably the most I've hate-watched a Toku. I could closely compare it to when I'm watching, or had watched, boring documentaries in school. It was just, Okay, let's start off positive for a second, I suppose. Things I liked about it, aside from the designs, which I do generally like, it started off semi-strong because I liked the mythology behind it. I thought they set up an interesting mythology, and I liked the slow start of getting the Zords. I'm sorry, I use the word Zords, purists. Getting the mecha and the weapons. There was a slow burn that I really liked. It sort of added to the mythology. It didn't make it feel so rushed like it can so often now. I liked that, but then after that it devolved into dull filler. Like the most dull, boring, generic filler. It felt like it made up like 85% of the show, and that's being generous. I was gonna say majority. Even I would say 90. It was just, and it was all bizarre filler about children in tight shorts, which made it weirder. And it was just unbelievable painful for me to watch. I didn't like it. It was awful. And there was so much wasted potential with the mythology. And the characters also, I have similar problems I do with Megaranger, where they all blend together, and the only reason I can remember them is because of their unique outfits, but I barely remember anything about them personally. And they're sort of these heroes out of time, which we've gotten in all kinds of toku and in general, and they didn't make use of that, whether it was for actual character development or even humor. Like, I was even hoping for some dumb toku humor about being out of time, but nope, they just accepted everything like that. Sometimes, you know, you can have that be a bit tedious and boring, but I was just hoping that was just a huge, like, plot device that they had that they never used. And I suppose I should bring up Burai, which I feel is, alongside Guy, and some of the most brought up, over-worshipped toku things. I really didn't like Burai. Certain things certainly got more interesting when he showed up because things were happening, but I felt like his backstory and the reason he mad? Such amazing English, guys. The reason he was mad was just so muddled, and it felt like at the end he only stopped fighting them because he lost. It didn't feel like I'm like, I was wrong. It was like, oh man, I'm sorry, I got my ass beat. It just felt like he was just, you know, mad that he lost. That felt like that was the only reason that he, not mad that he lost, but it felt like, oh, I'm defeated, I better join the good guys. That's what it felt like to me. Maybe it was just coming off weird. And his death, everyone's always like, oh man, the feels, he died, it was the saddest moment in television history. And honestly, I was just, when he died, I felt hungry. I was like wondering when lunch was. And the only part that was sad about it for me was, the only part that's sad about it, again with the amazing talking guys, was Dragon Caesar's sad reactions afterwards. It's just, it feels so overblown. There's been other deaths or near deaths or sad moments in Sentai or Writer or whatever that have made me actually sad than this. And it could be just a personal thing, but I did not like Zyuranger. Of all the series, it was probably the most overall that I hated watching something. And yeah, I just didn't like it. Alright, so there you have it. That is my top 5 worst. Again, that is my top 5 worst. I'm not saying this is the quantifiable, definitive top 5 worst. So now that I've finished Sentai, next will be best and worst writer series, and then we'll see where we go from there. Probably get into some categorical stuff like characters, maybe suit designs, I don't know. I like doing these videos and I appreciate the response to them. I've gotten obviously positive and negative, but there's been a lot of conversation and response going on to these videos, which makes me very happy because they're some of my favorite videos to film, because I just like talking about stuff, because when I get stuff going in my head, I just kind of need the vomit of them at the camera. So thank you for watching. I appreciate the response and interaction on these videos. Until next time, make sure you check out the Crazy Podcast at writersrangerambles.com. And of course, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Until next time, Dosm Writer and his talking hands, signing out.